when we started this project, we weren't sure who was going to be interested or who would be involved, and we've had the great fortune of finding excellent partners on this. The Hill Foundation, Kodak, TAMI, AMIA, of course, but we could not have done this without the participation of Boston Light and Sound and Chapin Cutler, and we're honored to have them here. It really means a lot to us, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everything you have to say, sir. So, without further ado, Chapin Cutler.
Thank you. You embarrassed me a little bit. I first, of course, heard about the conferences that AMIA and the Alamo were doing 2 years ago. And for a while I was afraid that it wasn't going to continue. And I can tell you how excited that I am and how excited we are to be a part of this. I'll start by telling you that I sort of started my career path when I was in high school. I was the geek with the great plastic rimmed glasses that pushed around a Bell and Howell 16mm projector from classroom to classroom, running Encyclopedia Britannica documentaries on whatever subject they happened to have a show for. And it was always kind of fun because it meant that I got out of class. And it also, and I was also happy because that meant that since I was not a football star, nor was I any kind of high school hero, it gave me a chance to do something nobody else could do. I graduated from high school, went off to college at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in 1960, and I had a buddy who loved theater organs, and he found that there was a sort of working theater organ in the Capitol Theater in downtown Worcester, and he could go down and play this organ on Sundays. And I spent my mornings going down with him, but I spent it talking to the stagehand who was there to fix seats and do maintenance in the theater. And as a result of that, I got myself into the position of training as a union projectionist. This picture here was taken about 1963. I'm sorry the quality isn't as good as I would have liked it to be. Believe me, the original is a lot better. I know it's hard to believe that I'm the guy with a tie and not the guy with a checked shirt, but the guy with a checked shirt was the business agent of the union. His name was John Murphy, and he and a bunch of older projectionists kind of took me under their wing. At that time in Massachusetts, in order to work as a projectionist, you had to be 21 years old and licensed by the Department of Public Safety. I was 18, 19, 20, and so I couldn't work. All I could do was train. To me, one of the amazing things about my career is these guys started their career in the middle or towards the end of the silent era. And they could regale me with stories about nitrate fires and when they first brought in sound systems and how they went about learning how to deal with sound systems and the advances that went through the time of the great screen widening until I came in the early 60s. And so to a degree, part of what's fortunate for me is then I have lived through the change from running high incandescent lamp houses and simplex XLs. On the left, the sound system is actually a Perspective sound system. They had 3 machines. They used the 2 on the left for running 3D when they ran 3D. Where you can't see it down about where my feet are was the sound transport. And the 3rd machine on the right-hand side was a Simplex E7. It was used to run trailers and shorts when they had a 3D show. So this was typical of a Lowe's Incorporated booth as it was equipped in the 50s. If it was in color, The bottom of the wall that's darker would be green, the top would be a dark green, the top would be a light green. And you could walk in almost any Lowe's theater and it would be equipped just like this. So I managed to flunk myself out of college because it was a whole lot more fun to run movies than it was to do homework. And I worked, I actually lied about my age and started working before I had a license at the age of 20. I joined this local in 1965. I haven't worked in the jurisdiction since 1970, but I still hold my card because these guys gave me a career. I moved to Boston. I got a degree in film production. I continued to work in movie theaters. Probably my best job and the job where I learned the most about film handling and presentation was what is now a relatively iconic art house called the Orson Welles Cinema. I worked as a projectionist in Boston until about 1975. I was an officer in the Projectionist Union, and about 1972, I met a guy by the name of Larry Shaw, who became my business partner. We formed Boston Light and Sound, and the idea with Boston Light and Sound was that at the time there was a need for a company to do film dailies for film shooting on location in the Boston area. And so he and I both had collected a lot of junk. We overhauled a couple of machines in the movie theater they worked in. Larry and I started our business in 1977, and we've been together for now 38 years. We started with this projector, which is a vintage Simplex XL. We had a sound head that obviously went with it. We had a preview magazine that we put together. We built our company on $3,000 that we'd managed to save. And these two junkers, they came out of a closed movie theater in Boston.
Is that an apple coming out of the pig's mouth?
It is. The story behind this picture is that there was a point at which we decided we needed to do an ad. And so this was our attempt at doing an ad. And the verbiage had to do with a faux menu of what it was you got if you hired us to do dailies. And so we took, my wife took the picture. We probably took 50 takes, and this was the first one. And quite frankly, as time went along, my partner became more and more dour because he was embarrassed by the whole thing. I would tell you, we probably ran the ad twice. In any event, the first big job that we did as a company was in 1981, which was we hooked ourselves onto the tour of the silent film Napoleon. Larry did the first show, or the first sets of shows, at Radio City Music Hall in January of 1981. Starting in March, I basically took over the tour, and 3/4 of the Napoleon shows that have ever showed in the continental United States were my responsibility as technical director. There were two of us. Zoetrope Studios was the distributor. The other technical director, we decided we weren't going to compete with each other, and so we divided the world by the Mississippi River. So everything west of the Mississippi, including Japan, was his, and everything east of the Mississippi, including places like Rome, was mine. In more recent years, I've continued to do them, including having done it in Cuba in 1988, in Francis Coppola's vineyard, I think it was 1998, and the last one that we did so far was at the Oakland Paramount 4 or 5 years ago. So what I've got next, I think, is a series of pictures that were taken during that time period. Most of the time we ran a 3 projector interlock to do the final 3-screen triptych, which is what the movie is most famous for. And I've got some pictures of that a little bit later on. But we also had a 70mm version, which in some places we used that because it was far less expensive. This is actually one of them. We put together 5 machines which are identical to this one, which is based upon a Norelco FP20, which Justin would applaud. And we set them up so that we could interlock 3 of them together, and then we used 2 to run the bulk of the program, which was 12 reels long. This is the beginning of a booth with 2 of the machines, with the 3rd machine that would run the triptych piece. In the middle, you can see there's a box with all the wires hanging on it. In this particular case, the left and right image projectors would have been at the extreme of the balcony, cross-shooting onto 3 screens. So this is one of the final triptych sequences. You can see how we winged 3 screens out from the middle. The orchestra was usually in a pit underneath. The score was written by Carmine Coppola, Francis Coppola's father. The orchestra was generally around between 80 and 88 pieces. If we stretched that screen out flat, it would have been 80 feet wide. So that's 3 panels, each of which is 20 by 27 feet. We had another one that we did that was 22.5 by 30. Part of the challenge with this was that the first 12 reels actually had been reformatted so there was space for the soundtrack. We were supposed to do the show at Wolf Trap in Reston, Virginia. As you know or may know, that location happens to be the only national park which is dedicated to the performing arts. They have had a permanent structure that they did their shows in. Unfortunately, I went down to survey it. We had everything all set and ready to go, and then the place burned down. So they came up with this tent arrangement, and this is the center booth with its 3 sets of equipment, and you can see the screen underneath that tent. The distance between the projectors and that tent or that screen is about 250 feet. That tent is 125 feet across. The screen is winged, and that's that same 80-foot screen that I showed you before. In 1982, we were asked to go to Rome and present it again. And they closed down a boulevard right outside the Colosseum. They had put together a film festival that ran for a month. And not that I know that much about Roman geography, nor would you, but that was the screen was directly in front of the Arch of Constantine. These are in no specific sort of time frame order. This was taken about 2011 in a field outside the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, Qatar. On the left is the stage structure, which was going to have an 84-foot wide screen in it, house a symphony orchestra, be set up so that after the orchestra played their piece, the screen would come forward on a gantry along with all of the speakers, and the projection booth is actually between those 2 towers. You can barely tell that it's there, and if you didn't know what it was there, you probably couldn't tell at this point. But I just wanted to give you an idea as to the breadth of this thing. This is one of those places in which I learned one of the inevitable things about sound systems. Never, ever, 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 ever put a loudspeaker behind a screen that has an amplifier in it. Bad idea, because when you put it behind a screen, you forget about it. and amplifiers that are in loudspeakers have fans, and they have filters, and the filters get dirty, and then the amplifiers get hot, and then the sound goes out, and now you got a mess because you have to go back there and take the amplifier out and replace it. The reason I say I learned that here is because they had gotten donated a beautiful Meyer sound system, and the sound system was 3 hangs of 9 speakers apiece across behind this screen. And the night before, or 2 nights before the show, somebody had reconnected the entire sound system to a new generator and hadn't tightened down the neutral. So 27 amplifiers went poof. And that meant we had to drop 27 speakers, take out the 16 screws that hold each amplifier in, go find fuses that didn't exist in Doha, Qatar, which had to come from Dubai, reinstall and put the whole system back up and tune it. So I am really kind of opposed to putting amplifiers behind screens. This is that structure as it's being built. This is the result opening night. The building to the left is the Museum of Islamic Art. The screen that's not lit is the screen that the movie was on. This is the stage with the orchestra kind of in place. You can barely see the screen in the background. That's a better shot. And that was taken from the booth. And this is one of those moments in my career in which, you know, I remember being the kid that I showed you in the first slide, and finding myself standing on the booth platform, which is where I was here, and just saying to myself, in my wildest dreams, in my wildest imaginings, 50 years before that, I never, ever, ever would have dreamed that I would have been there doing that. And I would say that to each and every one of you that really wants to be a projectionist and wants to carry what you do to the highest extreme. You too could be standing there doing something like that not too many years down the line. My partner Larry and I, when we started our business, it was just at the point in which platters were coming in, and automation and xenon lamps. And we had decided that what we wanted to do was not become one of those guys sitting in a booth watching platters twirl. And so what we did was set about to make a company in which we could take the craft that we had learned and carry it to an extreme. And this is an example of what I mean by carrying a craft that you guys are learning to an extreme. We also did another theater, which was in a parking lot. This is the booth for that theater. That's the screen being erected. That was the projector we used. Now, those of you who know projectors are going to say, what the hell? The distance between the screen, that's the second sound head. The distance between the screen and the booth was about 700 feet. And as we all know, there's no way of advancing the sound to move the sync from the audio sync from the screen back into the auditorium. So what we set about to do was to not have the sync point at the screen, but to be able to move it back about 5 frames. So what we did was we installed that second sound head. It was an analog print. It actually was a movie that was done by the Film Foundation, to give them a little plug. And it was an Egyptian movie called, I think it was called The Mummy, and which has nothing to do with a movie that we would call The Mummy. It had to do, as I recall, the plot had more to do with robbing artifacts than it had to do with creatures. So it was an optical track to begin with. So what we did was we put an optical head up using the holes that normally would have been used for the mag sound head, and then ran it through a digital delay so that we can actually get the audio to come out ahead of the picture, but be in sync about halfway back. This is taken from the booth at the Four Seasons Hotel The screen is obviously on the other side of a bay. The projection distance is about 350 feet. That's an FP10 projector with a kineton tower that was set up on a balcony in the hotel. That's the screen as it's being erected. If you look above the middle palm tree, you can see the projectionist and the machine between all those movable lights. I want to show you this picture because the screen erection was actually fairly interesting, because rather than having the frame affixed to the part that holds the screen up, it was actually on a gimbal, so that when the wind blew, it pushed the bottom of the screen forward and let the wind pressure down. It was pretty ingenious, because actually that one and the one that I showed you in the parking lot were set up kind of the same way. And it worked very well. And that's a nighttime view. The sound system, that was a bit of a challenge. And what we did was we stole a trick from the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas, that if you go and stand outside of their fountain at night, the music plays from the trees overhead. It doesn't come from where the fountains are. So what we actually did, and you can see the one pole that's kind of in the middle, is that we put the speakers behind where the audience was sitting, and that way we ran the sound through that rather than running it through trying to get it out of the screen. And I would say that the screen presence from doing that was probably not the greatest, but on the other hand, doing something like this, sometimes you have to sort of make compromises in order to make things work. And I just happen to like this picture because of the colors. This was the warehouse. We had to ship over, I think it was 6 storage containers full of equipment, because we had several other theaters to do. This is one of the outdoor venues that was built up. This is the scaffolding that held the seating and the projection booth up. This is the interior of the booth. Obviously we had 2 35mm projectors and a couple of double mutts, but the reason that we have four HD machines is 2 of them are used for projecting simply subtitles, because every movie that got played there had to be subtitled in Arabic. And so that created a problem both with the 35mm and with digital. And subsequent to that, except for running DCPs, we were able to install the ability to insert subtitles on HD, and in some cases, we'd end up with a print that had 3 sets of subtitles on it. So it was a bit of a challenge. This is the sound system. Everything that we do is always run in a redundant pair. So not only do we have 2 35mm projectors, but we had 2 Dolby systems. We had 2 HD cam decks and a third one. I don't necessarily remember why we had a third one, but it may have just been being cautious. This was all temporary. The booth was built out of plywood, and as I showed you, it was all built on scaffolding. One of the points I would like to make is part of the reason why our company has been successful at doing shows like this is because there are a set of standards which have been established for the industry. We stick absolutely and positively to those standards. We never deviate unless somebody like the director tells us to. This is another one of those, like I said, I'm jumping around. This is another one of those outdoor structures that we did in Doha, Qatar. That's the projection booth for that one. Those of you who know Clyde McKinney, he's most recognizable in the front. He has worked with us now for about the last 30 years. His background was he was with Dolby when it first came out with theirs, with Dolby Stereo, and was one of the people that made THX in the early days what THX was. That's what the place looked like. Now, the intent was that they wanted to have a pool with water in it in the black semicircle area. Somebody who also is sometimes known as an IOB or a curmudgeon, IOB standing for irascible old bastard, being me, said, no, you can't do that because you're going to be just reflecting the picture up in everybody's eyes, so they didn't do it. And I show you this picture because, you know, we talk about class differentiation both within our country and in other places. In the Arab Emirates, in the Near East, Near East, the rich people or the emirs have their own seating area, and it's walled off from everybody else's seat. And these are the seats that they get versus the seats that you can see that the rest of the people sit down in the front. And all the theaters are like that. This is a catamaran that we use up in Traverse City, Michigan, and they put people on the boat. They drink and go out about 3 miles out into the lake, and they all enjoy a movie, and then they come back. And the reason for 2 screens is you can see there's a giant pole in the middle that kind of holds the sky up. If we tried to put 1 screen across, we couldn't have done it because of the sail that goes down between the 2, and nobody would have been able to see the whole show. So actually, the video system all runs on batteries. This is one of my later acquisitions. This is an original Vitaphone projector. It's not a regular simplex, as we would call it. It's actually a Kaplan, and it's got the original RCA sound head, Western Electric optical sound head, and you can see in the back the turntable. There's a motor that drives the whole thing. We used to call these, or do call them, universal bases, because there's a big motor, the shaft that sticks out the back rides the turntable, and then it connects to a gearbox that has 2 or 3 shafts that come up. And the picture head and the sound head are driven separately. Those of you who were with Justin's class today talking about scanning drum flywheels and the need to have the flywheel come up to speed. This is another UN show. This was in another one of their rooms. This was done when E.T. was released. Steven Spielberg was given a Peace Award for having made the movie. This is where I learned about not ever using gain screens to do temporary setups, because in order to do this was another one of those cases where there was a table that we couldn't touch. And so we had 2 scaffolding towers, and it strung the screen across with bungee cords pulling it tight. Well, I didn't have a screen that was this size, but a local movie theater had just replaced their screen and put in a silver one. And so I borrowed the screen from them. Well, it was a gain screen, and when they rolled it up, it had wrinkles and creases in it. And a matte white screen is very forgiving. It can have wrinkles and creases, and you'll never know it because it reflects light evenly in all directions. A gain screen reflects light using the old principle of the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. And so as soon as you have something that's out of plane, it's throwing light in a different direction than everything else. And that can either show up as a dark smear, or it can show up as a bright light. It was a mess because I didn't have any other alternative. What we actually did was turn the screen over and project onto the back of it. This is the Hollywood Bowl. We did a couple of showings there that started with an orchestra. This happened to be, when we went to start the show, we actually dropped the screen down. It was for Singing in the Rain. And at the time we did this show, and it was done 35 millimeter film, when we did this show, Donald O'Connor couldn't make it, but Debbie Reynolds and Gene Kelly did. And the thing to me that's most remarkable about that is when the show started, Gene Kelly dragged a folding chair into the middle of that stage and sat there and watched the audience through the screen. This is taken in an amphitheater in Pompeii. We were running Alexander Nevsky with a score played by a symphony orchestra, and we did the same thing with scenes from Ivan the Terrible, where we had stripped the sound, the music out of the soundtrack and left the dialogue only. The bottom screen is for subtitles. That's Vladimir Ashkenazy conducting, and this is in fact the Roman amphitheater as it was left in Pompeii after Vesuvius erupted, and that's what it looked like at night. This is 1984, the World's Fair in New Orleans, the Petroleum Industries Pavilion. This was done again with two 35mm projectors that were locked together. One was direct shot, which was to the top screen. The bottom screen was at about a 15-degree angle to the floor. The projector was up in a ceiling, and we ran the image through a periscope, a set of periscope mirrors that were suspended overhead. The geometry was very tight, and when we got there, we couldn't get that bottom screen lined up perfectly. I probably spent 3 days sleeping on the booth floor until we figured out that the problem was they built the building a foot too short. Hopefully, I think this is among the last of what I've got. This picture was taken last year at the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston, where the Coolidge Corner Theater does a program outdoors for free in downtown Boston. And the guy on the right in the black is my partner Larry, who you saw in the chef picture. The guy in red is actually my son. This is our projection booth. The screen is a blow-up screen. There's part of the audience. We do this in conjunction with the Coolidge Corner. I have one proviso, and that is that the film must be run on film. And so, oops, where'd that go? There's the projector, set up in the back of the truck. Nick Lazzaro, who was who was the head projectionist at the Coolidge Corner, runs it. You know, there it is. A week ago, they actually ran Creature from the Black Lagoon in Anaglyph 3D. I didn't see it, but I understand it actually worked quite well. I didn't think it would because of the amount of ambient light, so I was proved wrong, happily. This is actually taken at the Cinerama Dome about 4 years ago. We had to run It's a Mad, 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 Mad World before we got involved in the Hateful Eight. And so I had bought one of these. I'd sent it off to a lens place and had all of the glass recoated, the flats are all replaced. So I basically made it a new lens. And I brought it out, and you know, the prints, the 70mm prints they have of Mad Mad World are an Ultra Panavision, but they're not set up to run on a curved screen. And so when we put a regular Panavision, Ultra Panavision lens on, the picture was stretched out. If we didn't put it on, it was compressed. But this had a variable squeeze ratio. That's what the knob on the top is for. It's actually the first lens made by Panavision and was the source of what has become Panavision. This was their first product. And it actually has two counter-rotating prisms that is used to stretch the picture out as you turn the crank. What we actually did was found that if we set it about halfway, that we got the wider image, but we also didn't have stretched out figures. And so that's actually how we ran the movie. Since that time, I now have access to about 140 lenses. These last two shots are during our Hateful Eight adventure. And I'm sorry the picture's kind of out of focus, but I also, again, wanted Shannon to see what the projector looked like in the Cleveland Institute of Art, which is the one in the front. And with that, you can see the 5,000-foot reel and all the rest of that stuff that went into it. These are the Ultra Panavision lens on this Victoria 8 is an original Ultra Panavision lens, and the one on the top is one of the two that we had to have designed because in the days when Ultra Panavision came out, theaters were large, projection distances were long, and the screens were relatively narrow in comparison to what they are today in places like this. So the Ultra Panavision lens worked fine on long lenses, but for short throws and relatively large screens, we had to have another one that was a redesign of the 1.25 anamorphics that were used in the early days of digital cinema. That's the team of people who did most of the work. Unless you have some questions, that's all I have to say.